Okay, so up to this point, we have seen different process model. We have seen what are the pros and cons of that particular process model, as well as we want to apply our knowledge now for the particular development process, right? So now, whichever the most efficient way I can apply that particular process model, that I have to check, and that is to be require lots of experience. It is not like just that I have learned this particular part and I'm just able to apply that. No, you have to apply your knowledge as well as you have to concern or you can adopt the new technology and then you can able to perform the task, right? So now the main concept of unit number 2 comes in this particular point, which is called as a agile methodology. Say I told you some drawbacks of generic process model. Can you able to tell me, student, what is the drawback of waterfall model? Yes, absolutely correct. That means if I want to develop any software development, or you can say any software, then whenever we are considering the need of the customer, that is to be frozen. That means the stage which is to be required, communication and planning, that is to be given in that particular phase. It is applicable for only small size project. Yes. So basically, nowadays, what happened in the industry? Now come to the real life example. Okay. So there are some consider that you are end user. That means you want one software which is to be developed by a particular company. Say for example, XYZ company. Okay. And that company is providing you all the facility according to your need. Okay. Once the half of the development is completed, then you are asking to that particular company that I want some little bit change in my requirement. Okay, so what happens that time? What developer will tell you? See, customer, this is actually we have done up to this point, and now we can't able to change that, right? So what will happen? The customer need is not fulfilled at this point, right? If the customer is changing their requirement and if I want to accept at a certain stage, then and then only I cannot able to apply waterfall model, right? Then I have to apply for the new methodology. I have to adapt a new methodology in me, and that concept is given by agile methodology. Okay, so in that we have to consider three parts. One is agile development, sorry. Another one is extreme programming, and the third one is agile practices. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen now with the help of chat box now. In our previous discussion, we have seen the development process, right? In unit number 1. Okay, thank you, students. So in that particular point, if I want to consider a software development with the help of Agile, that includes a requirements, which is to be considered the discovery and the solution, which is I'm getting for that particular software, is going to improve through the collaborative efforts. When I say collaborative efforts, then that time I want to understand the concept of self-organizing as well as cross-functional teams with their customers, or you can consider end users. Okay, so it is called as a adaptive planning. Okay, so we have seen in some process model in our previous unit that we have considered iterative process, we have considered incremental process, right? So in that we have to consider the evolutionary development. Okay, so what happens in the early development part, or we can say early delivery, or can I say continual improvement, or we can say flexible response to change in requirement, then that is basically given, or that is a most important we can say problem in front of me, and that problem is now going to remove with the help of agile methodology, or you can get agile software development. So this is called as an agile manifesto. So then we call that as a manifesto for agile software development. So these values and principles were derived from the that particular development frameworks, and including, say for example, we have added Scrum over there, we are having Kanban over there. So these are what? These are having the frameworks, and that frameworks gives me the methodologies which gives me, or which is to be required for the cross-functional team, as well as it is required for evolutionary development, and where I can able to change in requirements. Okay, that can means I can able to give the response to change in the requirement. And while these are to be considered, that is nothing but I am adopting agile practice, and which gives me improves, and which I consider that it is going to improve the effectiveness of software professionals. And that is nothing but that is related to team and organization, right? So for the purpose, if I want to understand this particular point, then manifesto for agile software development, it is basically when I consider, I have written here few frameworks, which is nothing but Scrum, XP, Crystal, feature driven development. So that is comes under Agile Manifesto. So basically, whenever we want to require or we have to respond for change, then and then only we are requiring to go for this particular development process. So the agile software development, with that nothing but the values, which is to be based on their combined experience of particular developing a software and helping others to that particular scenarios to manifesto the consider that particular individuals and interactions over the process, and which is the tool we are going to understand. So individuals and interactions over the process we have to consider with the help of working software, right? Where we have to consider the comprehensive documentation part, right? Whenever we are considering the SRS student, what exactly the SRS gives you is provided for which type of thing, so that I can able to develop. That means it gives me the exact specification of my software. Say for example, I'm not coming from the IT background. Okay, I'm not having any knowledge regarding the IT background. Okay, so what happened to the end user? Say end user is not having that knowledge of the software, and he want to learn that particular software. Basically, this SRS gives a particular point where the customer can able to understand what exactly your software is. That means your scope of your software. This is the most important point we have discussed in our tutorial also. Then afterwards, we have seen the functional requirements. That means how a particular software will work for a particular period of time. That is to be given with the help of this document. Getting now? So whenever I'm working, that means working software over the comprehensive documentation. And that documentation is to be required to understand the need of the end user. And that is to be added, that is already there in my particular development process. But the agile software development, in the particular point, if I want to consider the SRS, then that is to be considered the customer collaboration. So when I say customer collaboration, that means in every phase of the software development process, your particular your end user is always be present for that particular period of time. Okay, so that particular point is given by this particular agile development. So in the agile manifesto, we have to consider some principles. So basically, whenever I'm developing the evolutionary process, or you can consider evolutionary process model, then what exactly we are doing here? We are considering the small increments, right? So for the purpose, the agile manifesto first principle gives that it is given for continuous delivery. Say, for example, some period of time means if I'm considering one company that as like I have told you that in that they require some particular, that means the customer require a small amount of information from which I can consider that for a medical information. Okay, so it is the software is for the pharmaceutical part. Okay, so what will happen? The continuous delivery, that means the user, that end user will get their software throughout the process. That means we are considering that communication, planning, then afterwards we are designing, then afterwards implementation, then afterwards we are considering testing, and last we are considering the delivery part, right, of a particular software. So that what will happen if I'm continuously, if I'm delivering that particular software, then each phase will be executed at all times, so that I can able to accept the change which is to be required from the customer side, and that's why they can able to understand, or they can able to consider that this is the change I require. They can go back and delivery working software, they have to consider frequently, they have to deliver that particular working software to end user, which involves this and developers throughout the project. When I consider bridge, that is nothing but the end users. Okay, where we have to consider the build projects around the motivated folks. Yes, that is to be required. See, student, every time it is not possible to accept the change and deliver that particular software to the end user. This is really like if I'm considering the myth over here, then that is not a case every time it is to be carried out. So for the purpose, there has to be require some motivation part. So for the purpose, whenever if something is to be goes in the wrong direction, then I have to tell to the developer every time. Project manager is basically responsible for all this activity. So project manager gives that particular motivational task or motivational point to that for their colleagues, so that they can able to execute that task very effectively as well as within a period of time. Then also there should be a communication should be carried out by face-to-face communication. It is not like that customer is sitting in another place and developer is sitting in another place and they are doing their communication. No, they should be sit together and they have to understand their requirement, and they want to understand what exactly the change I require. If I want to add these features in this particular point, then what I want to do. Like that communication is to be carried out in this particular Agile Manifesto. So basically in that we have to consider the some matrices, right? So metrics to be given for the progress. And what progress? That is nothing but for working software basically. Then afterwards there should be maintained a constant pace over there. And that is to be given for a small attention to that particular, consider that I'm very excellent in that particular technology and I'm excellent in the good design, and the part is given for the other person. So there to be should given that attention to that, so that a proper work is to be carried out from the proper person. Okay, there to be some simplicity in the essential parts is to be given. Yes, because whichever the part is most important for the particular software, it is to be get carried out as it is. Okay, there is to be considered as a self-organization team, as well as, just a minute, to consider self-organizing team. What exactly it means? It means that whenever we are considering organization, okay, so for the purpose we are developing a particular software for end user, right? So organization is responsible for each and everything which is to be required to develop, right? And that is given by the team members, because team members are responsible for developing that particular software. That means we are considering that in the form of parts, that developer team is different, then afterward testing team is different, the deployment team is different. So for the purpose, we are having the self-organization part is to be carried out, so that the responsibility is to carry it out to that particular team. Okay, and that is given by this particular principles is to be applied for the Agile Manifesto. Now let's understand what exactly this functional evolutionary design steps is to be carried out for this particular Agile methodology. Okay, so in the evolutionary design steps, basically we have to consider here refactor process. That means we have to understand the first of all we have to consider that we have to understand that test driven development now. Okay, so when I say test driven development, so basically it is to be given in such a manner that it is to be considered that it is to be carried out in the form of TDD, and we have to understand the map of object to that data particular point, where we have to consider what type of things I can able to add, or what type of things I can able to make a change in my software, so that it cannot able to affect to the other part of my software. This is the most important concept we have to understand by using the Agile methodology. Give me a minute, student. Test driven development, that particular refers to style of programming in which three activities are tightly considered. Okay, so that test driven is an evolutionary approach which development which combines the test first development, where you have to first write the you have to first test before you have to write, just enough for the particular production code to fulfill that the test and refactoring. So when I consider the terms of refactoring, and we can consider that whatever the things we are considering here, that is coding and testing and design, right? So that is to be given. They are basically these three activities are tightly interconnected. So in such a way, we have to consider write a single unit test which describes the aspects of program. When we consider run the test, we should fail because the program lacks that features. And then afterwards, we write the just enough code that's simplest possible to make the test to pass. Now let's consider what exactly we want to go for the refactoring. So basically refactor the code until it conforms to simplicity that particular. That means I want to go up to that point. That is to be get repeated part, and that is to be given me some simplicity criteria. That is to be accumulating that particular test is going to be conducted over the time. So whenever we are considering this particular TDD, that is called as a test driven development, now what is the primary goal of this particular TDD? So basically the one view is the goal of TDD is for the particular specification and not for the validation. So this is to be given by Martin, Newkirk and Case in 2003. So they have developed, that is, they have introduced this particular TDD. That means they have given some views regarding the development, and that development process is given for the specification. That means rather than giving the more attention to the validation, what they are doing, they are giving the more preference for the specification, and that is nothing but the TDD. So that actually the given words that is to be given for the most important aspects in consider the agile requirements, and we are considering here they are going to be implement for the particular point. In any software development process, what is the first stage we are going to execute, student? We are executing first requirement analysis, right? That means requirement gathering, not the analysis, only requirement gathering. So that is to be given in this particular point. If I am to consider this requirement or design before you write your functional code, that means you are performing the task over here where we have to understand the end user's requirement, right? So in that particular point, the agile requirements and the agile design techniques are going to be considered in such a manner that they have to first of all write that particular work which is to be required in such a manner. We have to consider the significant reduction in the defect rates, as well as at the cost of we are considering increase the initial development efforts, and at the same time we are considering here a team lead tend to report these overheads, and that is to be considered with reducing efforts or in the project final phases. Yes, that is we can able to perform with the help of this part. So basically TDD leads to improve the design qualities in the code, and more generally a higher degree of that considered as the internal, consider the technical quality, for instance to improve the metrics, and that is to be given in the form of cohesion and coupling. So basically, if I want to understand all these points, then I have to consider the TDD. So what is TDD is basically the step of the test first development, TFD. This is called as a test first development, our overview in the UML activity. So basically UML in the previous session in unit number 1, I just introduced you that what exactly unified modeling language is, that is required for the activity diagrams. Okay, that is what type of things we are performing with the help of that particular activity. Okay, so the first step is to quickly add a test. Basically it is required if the code is get fails, then we are not considering that part, but it have to consider that it has to be get tested, right? Then afterwards, next you have to run that particular test. Often the complete test is considered that it should be not able to giving me that absolute result, but ensure that the new test does not fact to that particular fail. That means failure rate is to be not given for that particular test. So that part is to be given by test first development. So in that particular test for development, we have to consider that what exactly the mistakes, the typical individual mistakes includes in this. So we have to consider that forgetting to run the test frequently, Writing too many tests at once, that is the most important point, and writing tests that are too large, or you can say writing or trivial tests, for instance, omitting the assertions, and writing tests for trivial instance, which is to be required, and that includes partial adoption. Okay, that means only a few developers on the team use TDD. So basically, that concept we have to understand in this particular part. So you have to consider that you have to functional code to make it pass the new test. And here, whenever we are considering that particular point, that if they fail, you need to update your functional code, right? And you have to again retest. So once the test pass, the next step is to start over. That means once it is to be completed, that means the first test is completed, then you go to the next step to start over. And that is basically you need to refactor by any duplication out your design as needed, then tuning the TFD and TDD. So for the purpose, you have to consider that the functional code to make it pass. Then and then only go to the next stage. Now here I have given one part. Then what exactly you want to do for the steps to test the first development. So the first adder test, it is just a flow, which exactly we are going to develop with the help of the flow chart. Then run the test. Once the run is test, then I can want to check, is it going to pass or is it going to fail? If it is pass, then I can able to add the new test, that is next test. And then if it is fails, what happens? I have to make a little change, and I want to perform the task with the for the particular point. I have to make that particular things where I have to pass the development phase. If it is fail, then again I have to make a little change in that, and I go to the next step like that. So here I can able to consider that, that is make change or make a little change in that particular point. I have to again run that test. So continuous development process is to be carried out for a particular pass. Only means if the test is passed, then and then only I can able to consider that next step of the development is to be carried out. And that exactly we are considering for this particular TDD. Getting everybody up to this point?